So now we're moving into our Cheers to the Ladies Who section, where we shout out dope shit and people doing dope shit. Yeah. So you gave us a little light on this film, Disclosure. Can you tell us a little bit about the film?
Disclosure is a documentary film. I think it's making the rounds in some film festival.
Sundance, I think.
Sundance, yeah. It's produced by Laverne Cox, executive produced by Laverne Cox, and what the documentary basically tries to do is it's a project in revisionist history, but in a positive way, where they try to trace back historical representations of trans bodies and characters from the past in positive and negative ways, and tying the thread from the past all the way to now, because in the dominant national narrative, a lot of people are only being exposed to the idea of transness as a very new phenomena. And a part of what this documentary purports to do is to show that that's just not the case.
Right.
So yeah.
That's incredible.
Probably something that I'm going to be seeing at some point when it's available to me.
And it says here, so it's directed by Sam Feder, and it's interesting because they have different trans stakeholders in the film who are commenting on, just like navigating through Hollywood and some of the ways in which the representation is good, and then some of the ways in which the representation is problematic. And it's so interesting because as someone who tries to be an ally in all the ways possible, I've sort of had to come to terms with the fact that there's a lot of education I don't have around the trans community in terms of the history behind it. Certainly I don't think it's a new phenomenon. I'm not that silly, but just in the sense of I don't what has been the history of this community outside of Marsha P. Johnson, just some of the names and talking about Stonewall, but what is the bigger community? And I watched season 1 of Pose, and that was a little taste, but even in watching that, I'm and that's just a nugget of a bigger history and in a specific community in New York, but what was going on everywhere else. And I think that it's so important that films like these are being made, not just for people like me to get educated, but also for people who are trans and need to see that representation and need to have something to connect to, because no one else is giving that education anywhere else.
Yeah, so, I think that especially with speaking to Pose and having it come out, I actually had a conversation with my mom one day, and I was like, I want you to watch this because you are someone who lived through this, and I know nothing about any of this. I find that the people that lived through this time where it was the height of the voguing scene in New York, and the trans and AIDS epidemic and all this stuff, and the LGBT community and all this shit. Yeah. They lived through it, and they knew people, and they they actually lived through this time, but nobody talks about it, and nobody is actually stepping forward to educate on it. And I think it's crazy that as a 28-year-old man, I have to look to an FX show or actually really try and do my homework to gain access to this history.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think another thing that we were saying before we were recording is that one of the things that they're trying to push back against is the familiar trope of, again, disclosure, the idea that trans people are obligated to disclose the state of their physical genitals right off the bat when they're meeting someone.
Right.
And it, flies in the face from the idea that everybody has information that they don't necessarily need everybody knowing.
Right. Yeah. Right. This really also brings to mind the whole Nikki Tutorial situation that just went on, where Nikki Tutorials is this huge makeup artist who has been around for a decade making content. You're talking about this woman has created a career solely based off of her talent, and because of one person having to
threaten to out her.
Yeah. That's why she ended up coming out as trans and stuff like that.
Yeah. And it's really I'm just like, fuck. Like, when did we become so sinvergüenza? Like, you know what I mean? Like, when did we become so entitled to other people's personal information? Is really beyond me. Like, and even we had this debate 2 seasons ago. Actually, we had a guest, and it was a sort of off-camera, air debate about him feeling like, yeah, it's almost like a lack of respect to me if you can't be honest to me about what you really are. And it's just like, no, what you're missing is that what I really am is what you're getting. Like, that is who I really am. And so I don't actually owe you, again, disclosure. I don't owe you that disclosure. And he felt very strongly about it. And it's interesting because even in hearing him talk about it, it was like almost, it was so aggressive, like in a way where, and I'm just like, wow. And I'm just talking about it and you're aggressive. I can't imagine the fear that trans people feel when they are engaging with someone and then that person sort of starts to turn on them and like ensue that aggression towards them.
Yeah. And there's also the double-edged sword of the stigma that comes that's leveraged at people who are attracted to trans people.
Yes.
There's a lot of the time some anxiety around social suicide.
Yeah.
So that's another part of the issue around the work of normalizing, or some people might call it assimilation.
Right.
There are good and bad things about it, for sure.
Yeah.
And I think tackling some of the fear and sensationalism around it is part of the positive part of that work.
Absolutely, but I'm really glad that this is a narrative that is controlled it's for the community, by the community, and not just somebody being like, oh, big money opportunity, let's talk about trans lives, which often happens sometimes when we're learning about narratives, is the narrative's not being told from the actual community. So I'm really happy to see that.
Yeah, it looks like they had a real production budget too. So.
Yeah, it does. No, for real, it does.
Hopefully it's good.
So yeah, cheers to that.